It's spring, so tulips. I feel like every time I start a video, my voice automatically changes and it sounds just super weird. It's been a little bit, just a minute, since I made a video, so I think what I'll do is hit the reset button, talk about all the books that I've read so far this year. I want to start with my favorite book that I read this year, which is this one, Margo's Got Money Troubles. I think this is the last book that I remember really talking about. I was about to read it a couple of months ago, and I read it and I just loved it. Margo's Got Money Troubles is about Margo, the titular Margo, and she has money troubles because she becomes a mother at a very young age. At around 20 years old, she is a single mother. She can't really have a job because she needs to take care of her child. Her parents are not super present in her life, and she has to really kind of live by her wits, basically. And things take a turn when her father comes back into the picture and starts to help her, but he has his own set of issues going on at the same time. Margo is being a mother to her infant. She's learning what that means, what that entails, while at the same time navigating this relationship with her now very present father, at the same time balancing a more complicated relationship and dynamic that she has with her mother, all while really having to focus on her day-to-day realities, which are making money so she can afford to live somewhere, afford to eat, afford to care for her son, all of these things. And the way that she finds to do that is she comes across OnlyFans. The best part really about this book is Margo herself. She's super smart, she's super funny, but she's still like a child, and she reads that way. Rufi Thorpe does such a good job of giving voice to that. Truly the last time I can think of a writer in a totally different medium just getting teenage girl, or a little bit older in this case, so well was in My So-Called Life. If anybody remembers that show, it's still on Hulu. It's still an amazing show, and I could watch it today and I think that I could still relate to Claire Danes' character, and it just got the nuances so well of the things that we think and how we feel and the specific challenges, I think. My favorite part of this book, aside from Margo herself, is really just the writing. It's wildly funny, but it's poignant. There is a gravitas to the story, and there has to be. It couldn't really be as funny if it wasn't grounded in the seriousness of the situations that Margo's in and the things that she's dealing with and balancing and trying to navigate in some kind of way. And I just had the most fun time with this book. I don't really do top 10s or anything like that, but I do have favorite books at the end of the year, and so I imagine it's going to definitely be in that list. Let's see. Okay, the next one, I'm not going to talk about this one too much because if you've watched any of my other videos, I've talked about this book for literal months because it took me a long time to read, and it is The Hunter by Tana French. This is the other book that I truly loved this year. I talk in much more depth about it in previous videos, but the long and short of it is this is the second book in this mini series by Tana French. My understanding is that it's going to be a trilogy, and it follows a retired Chicago detective, Cal Hooper. I think it's Hooper, not Hopper. Yep, Cal Hooper. And he has moved to a really small town in Ireland and gets involved in, he doesn't want to, but he gets involved despite his best efforts not to, in the town's particular dynamics and the things going on there, specifically with one of the kids in town whose name is Trey. In this novel, Trey's father, who is otherwise absent from the first novel, comes back and tries to implement like this get-rich-quick scheme that's going to involve and affect the entire town. This book is described, or I think at least categorized, as a thriller. I I don't disagree to take away from the book, but it is not a thriller in the sense of when I'm looking for a thriller book, I'm looking for something that like I'm going to rip through that book really quickly. This is not that book. This is a book that is very slow. And it's been criticized. I saw some of the Goodreads reviews. Like, people did not like that this book was as slow paced as it is. I think those people are used to, I guess, what Tana French's writing has been in her, I think it's the Dublin Murder Squad detective series books. I don't really have much experience with those books. I feel like I read one a long time ago, but I just don't remember it. So I guess I have a little bit of an advantage there because I haven't read that, so I don't really have much to compare it to. And for me, the pace of this book was actually a feature, not a bug. I loved it. It took me a long time to read, but I wanted to spend that time with it. I loved this beautiful, quiet, complicated world that Tana French just wrote so tenderly. And there's a mystery component, there are thrilling aspects to the book, but it really is not, to me, the focus of the book. You have to go in wanting to spend time in this world. I get the sense like it's very uniquely Irish. And I have to say too, like, there's something about Ireland that I am just fascinated by. I spent some time in Ireland when I was in school. I did a study abroad. When I was a little bit older, I was in law school actually. I did a study abroad in Belfast for, I think it was 2 weeks in Belfast and then a week in Dublin. And I don't know what it was. There was just something like magnetic about Ireland. Like, there's a sadness to Ireland. I'm sure due in part to its history, but it's such a compelling, captivating place. And there's like an inherent mysteriousness about Ireland, and I feel about Irish people and their culture, and it is just captured so well in this book. I say, as a person who is not Irish, and maybe I have absolutely zero authority to say any of that, but to me, it just, God, it hits all of those marks, and I love this book. My girlfriend wants to read this book. She lives in across the country from me. Like, I could send it to you because my friends and I will do that. You know, we'll send each other our books. Mostly it's just me and this one friend because not a lot of my other friends read too much. But I'm like, no, I don't want to get rid of this book. I want to keep it. So I'm being a little bit selfish with it right now. Anyway, yeah, Tana French. I guess I can't stop talking about it. Sorry. I'm not really going in order here. I'm just trying to check off the ones that don't require too much conversation because there's a lot on this list. The Favorites by Lane Fargo is another audiobook. This one suffered for me probably for it suffered for me for two reasons, one of which I don't think is the book's fault. Well, it's not the book's fault, it's my fault. I thought that the book was a thriller because the last book that I read from Lane Fargo was a thriller, and so I just made an assumption. And anyway, I spent like 3/4 of the book waiting for the thriller aspect of it, and I finally looked it up and was informed that it is not a thriller and is in fact a romance. So that's not really the book's fault. But I do fault the book, and the more time I've spent away from it, the more I feel, I don't know, it's just something about it rubs me the wrong way. When I was reading it, I was like, wow, this really is like very Daisy Jones in the Six-ish. Like, there's a lot of DNA. It just borders on too much of an influence, and I'm sure, an outlier in this opinion. So, you know, take it for whatever it's worth. It's about an ice skating couple. They're like longtime friends, and it goes through the trials and tribulations of these two people who they are childhood friends. They become ice skating partners, and they become, God, I hate this word. Sorry. They become lovers, or they're in a relationship, whatever. It's very dramatic and to me, a little bit melodramatic. There's a lot of DNA of other things peppered throughout this book, which I don't mind in and of itself. Authors have to derive their inspiration from things, but it's like, it's God, it's like this, it's a hair too close to like a copy and paste job. So in addition to the Daisy Jones and the Six, it was like, this is like Tanya Harding meets some other kind of, I don't know, storyline, you know, minus the violence, I guess. But anyway, it's good. There were moments that I was surprised and it kept me entertained. I just don't have much to say about it beyond that. And I guess if you're looking for this format of an audiobook and you haven't read or listened to Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid, I would recommend that one over this one, keeping in mind they're not the same story, but there's a lot of similarities in my opinion. So anyway, that was The Favorites by Lane Fargo. Let's see, what's next? Okay. Yeah, I talked about this one as well already, so very briefly, this is Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney. Another one to me that's kind of a disappointment. What is all over it? Gross. Our kitchen, it's a long story, but we had some water damage and now I'm just finding like debris over all of our possessions. Beautiful Ugly this is a thriller. Let me put it this way. The first half of the book I really liked. The second half of the book became too absurd for me because it felt like Alice Feeney was trying to make something happen that was not organically happening in the writing process. I am imposing a lot of perhaps unfair standards on these authors, so I will acknowledge that. Beautiful Ugly is about a writer and his wife who goes missing. The book primarily takes place in the present day where the writer husband has gone to a remote island to try and write his next book, but he's haunted by the disappearance of his wife. And by haunted, I don't just mean the memory of her. He thinks that he is seeing her on this island, but the assumption I believe is that she's dead. Other mysterious happenings go on while he's on the island. There are themes regarding unreliable narratorship. You know, there's some question of addiction, perhaps. Grief, obviously, is a big running part of this. It just took a turn in the end, which I think happens to a lot of thriller authors because they've spent a good chunk of their book building up, creating the atmosphere, but something needs to happen, and so they kind of force the event, and it just doesn't feel earned in a way, and that was my ultimate opinion of this book. I will say I loved the atmosphere. It was really good in creating the vibes, so to speak. It's like a good plane or beach read or something like that. Let's see, let me talk about books that I don't actually have physically with me. Okay, Tell Me What You Did by Carter Wilson. That was another audiobook for me. I've done a lot of audiobooks this year, like half and half. I have my notes here. Bear with me because I don't remember this book very well. Partly because I listened to it and partly because, according to my notes here, it is a popcorn thriller using podcast element in a fun way, but I started losing interest about 3/4 of the way through. Becomes a little repetitive. Ending is rushed, like most of this genre, but the audio narration is good, ultimately enjoyable but forgettable. The story is the main character, Poe, is in her 30s. She lives alone. She has a very successful crime podcast. And the hook of this podcast is she interviews people who are confessing to crimes. Tell me what you did. In fact, I believe that's the name of the podcast. And what her podcast audience doesn't know, but the reader finds out pretty early on, is that there's some masochistic element to this podcast because when she was in her teens, Poe witnessed the murder of her mother. And you don't really quite know what happened there other than it happened, but how did she deal with it in the intervening years since she witnessed the murder? And that story is explored throughout the book as the present day elements are going on. The present day element mainly is that she has, sorry, my dog she's laying in between the tripod, and so I'm just waiting for her to move and everything's going to come tumbling down. She has a guest on, a person that she did not even know existed. She didn't believe existed. And I think that's all I can say without spoiling anything. Suffice it to say, it's a fun book. It's very like cat and mousey, I would say. But my note here, it becomes a little repetitive. I think that's why I started losing interest because yeah, we were just kind of going over the same things and I was like, "Oh, can we just like get to the point already?" And the ending, kind of the same criticism that I had of Beautiful Ugly, which is that it felt very rushed and kind of got a little bit silly. Now, some people really like that in thrillers. You know, that's part of why thrillers are fun. Don't do it. Don't do it. But for me, I don't know. I guess I feel like you should try to pick a lane. If it's going to be just like Looney Tunes from the beginning, I can accept that. But don't lure me in for, halfway through the book or three-quarters of the way in and then make it just completely off the wall bonkers. Like that drives me nuts because then I feel tricked and I feel like the author, I don't know, was like succumbing to some sort of pressure about making the book something that it really wasn't. And again, I could be too harsh and my expectations for thrillers, a popcorn thriller nonetheless, might be too high, but that was my overall thing. Oh, I also have a note here. Love the dog and cat. So I think it was a very good audiobook. So if you can rent it or something, it would be a great one to listen to. But I have other audiobooks on my list that I prefer. The next audiobook is The Heiress by Rachel Hawkins. I really liked this book. I listened to it in a day while I was cleaning, and I just thought it was really fun. Did I? Yes. I thought it was really fun. I think part of the reason I liked it so much is that I'm, like a lot of people, I'm watching White Lotus right now. And so it was very like, this family felt like a family that could be on this season or any season of White Lotus. So if you like White Lotus, you might like this one. So The Heiress is the story of Ruby McTavish, the titular heiress. And the tension in the novel surrounds the inheritance that she has left her adopted son, Camden. Ruby McTavish is famous or infamous, however you want to think of it, for two main reasons aside from her extreme wealth. One is that she was kidnapped as an infant, but later returned to her parents several months later. So there is kind of a question of identity that peppers this book. The second reason she is infamous, really, is that she has been married many, many times, like Elizabeth Taylor style, and she's been widowed each and every time, often under questionable circumstances. The book is told through multiple points of view, if I can remember correctly, and we are hearing mainly from Camden, his wife, Jules, and Ruby herself. At the start of the book, Ruby has died, and Camden and his wife have cut ties pretty much with that family. And I believe that they all live in North Carolina. There's like a big estate. Again, very White Lotus. Camden receives a call from one of the family members saying, hey, you have to come to North Carolina to deal with the estate and related issues. So the story mainly plays out with Camden and his wife going to North Carolina to deal with the estate and all of these other elements of what happens when extreme wealth is passed down and there are family members who have a problem with the manner in which it was passed. That's all I'll say. I thought it was a very fun book, and it was a little bit, for me, different speed of a thriller. And yeah, like I said, I listened to it in one day, and I believe I rented it or something. It's been out for a little while, so I don't think it should be hard to get if you don't want to spend the money on an audiobook. Okay, the last audiobook is Count My Lies by Sophie. I don't know if it's Strava or Stava or Stava, whatever. It'll be up here. It's entertaining. It's kind of frustrating, but you have to just, this is one where it's like, you have to know what you're getting into before you start it. Like, it's stupid, it's silly. So in this one, you're following the main character whose name is Sloane. Sloane is a pathological liar. She lies about literally everything, but she is a terrible liar. Like, anybody who has the ability to think one step ahead would know not to lie about the things that she lies about. So it's very weird. And there's some kind of excuse made in the book that this has to do with her own insecurities and inferiorities. I don't know. To me, it just came off as dumb. Either way, she ingratiates herself into this family, the Lockhart family. She becomes really good friends with the mother, Violet, and then she has an attraction to the husband, whose name is Jay. Violet and Jay have their own marriage dynamic going on, and of course there is a child in the mix who Sloane becomes the nanny for. And if you've read The Housemaid by Frida McFadden or similar books, it's not 100% the same. There's obviously some differences, but a lot of that, again, like a lot of the DNA is very similar, at least in my humble opinion. It's perfect. It's a fun book. It's highly forgettable, and there's nothing remotely original about it. So I'm making it sound like a terrible book, but you know, if a book is really bad, I will stop reading it. I will stop listening to it. I did not do any of those things with this book. I listened to it in a timely manner. And I will say I have DNF'd one book this year, not one that I would have expected to DNF, and I listened to more than 50% of it so far. Maybe I'll revisit it at some point, but it was Happy Place by Emily Henry. I actually like Emily Henry, even though I'm not the biggest romance genre person, but I try to step outside of my comfort zone here and there. To me, like, I'll read romance. I'm trying to have a mix of things, of which I probably am failing a little bit so far this year, but I'm also listening to a nonfiction book. So I'm trying out different authors, and to me, that provides the most comprehensive experience. A long way of saying Emily Henry is not exactly stepping outside of my comfort zone, but I feel like I am because I don't usually gravitate toward romance. I had to DNF Happy Place because, speaking of repetitive and something frustrating that I could sense was happening, one of my least favorite tropes ever is miscommunication that could be solved by like a conversation. I think I've said this before on this channel. So I got the sense that that was the direction that we were headed in, and I gave it to like 57%, and I had to DNF it. So if anybody's read Happy Place and can tell me, you don't have to tell me what happens. I have a pretty good idea of what happens. You don't have to tell me what happens, but you can tell me if I'm wrong. But if I'm right and it's just like miscommunication has caused the conflict in this whole book, then I can't finish it. I will not subject myself to that. My little deviation from my script is not a script. This is just a list of my books. The next book, I don't have it because I left it in Texas and I didn't feel like taking it back to Idaho with me, is called Small Town Horror by Ronald Malfi. The main way I can describe this book is that it's very Stephen King-esque, but it's written in a much more like cerebral way. Stephen King, to me, the best part of King's writing is that he takes into account the characters and where they're from and how they would talk, so there's a highly relatable manner of dialogue. This is different. It's a different style of writing. It's not better, it's not worse, it's just different, but there's so many King elements to me where the story mainly takes place in a town called Kingsport, which is like a very small coastal town in Maryland. Anybody who's read King or, you know, some of his more famous works know that they often take place in New England, specifically Maine, and similar vibes, right? Like, you have like dark and stormy weather. There's a lot of water elements involved. There's very much this like impending, looming sense of dread, and you're kind of oppressed by it almost, by the imagery in the book, especially here. And I think that's very intentional because the issue is right up front, you learn that Andrew is from this small town. He gets a call from a friend, a very close friend that he had in high school. The friend tells him, hey, this tragedy has occurred. You need to come back to town. You learn then that all of the other people that he was friends with in high school, they had a little group. They still live in this small town. He's the only one who's left. The tragedy that's happened, it has echoes of an event that occurred when the group were teenagers. Something really bad happened and they all more or less agreed to keep it a secret. But it has been haunting each and every one of them in some ways, a very literal way, to varying degrees. So Andrew has to go back to this town, deal with this issue, but more to the point, there's a reckoning of the past and what happened and how these people are going to move forward or drown from the weight of their guilt or the implications and consequences of the actions that occurred all those years ago. So that's where the water imagery, there's a lot of like drowning and very much like a suffocation aspect to this book that I think it's a little bit, I guess it's like a little bit heavy-handed, but I wasn't too bothered by it. I think the only thing with the book that I picked this one up. Let me back up. I picked this one up. This was like a book that I just was like, I'm going to go to the bookstore and I'm going to pick up a book. I didn't want a recommendation or anything. This is not really groundbreaking, but nowadays it's hard. I find it hard to just go to the bookstore and do what I used to do, which is like look at the bookshelves, read the book jackets, and pick up a book. I always want to get some sort of endorsement. So this was one I just picked up entirely of my own accord, and it was just fine. It just wasn't as like, there was something missing, and I think it was that there was something missing in the characterization. There was really only one character that I felt much, if anything, for, and like not even enough at that. So I think there was some aspect with the writing that maybe wasn't quite there for me, but it was a totally fine book. And again, it's not necessarily one that I might recommend paying full price for, but it's very much worth it if you like darker books that deal with themes of grief and guilt and regret and confronting a past that you're ashamed of and how to move forward from that. Again, these are very common themes in horror books. It's very light on the horror, in my opinion. It's very overt when it exists, but the real horror, as is true in most horror books, is not really in the like supernatural or like monster, like whatever type of horror there is. It's in the underlying occurrences, right? It's in the horror of your grief and the things that people do and are capable of doing. So anyway, Small Town Horror by Ronald Malfi. It was just fine. All right, just 2 more to go. We'll see how long this video is. This is the last one that I read. This is called You Are Fatally Invited by Andy Pliego. I don't know. Again, let's see. Let me think. Let me think? No, let me think. I just finished this the other night, and it's another one that I'm like, it's just fine. I was hoping to have a little bit more fun with it than I did. I picked this one up based on, I think, a New York Times book review that I read. The only thing with this one is I got very much a very strong sense that it's just like dying to be a Netflix series or something. And if it becomes a Netflix series, I would happily watch it. But reading it was a different experience. It's about a group of writers that are invited to this retreat on a remote island. And what all of these writers don't know is that they have more or less been lured there because they've all done something in their past that they need to be held accountable for. It's told through many different perspectives. There are what felt like a lot of characters and a lot of storylines to have to keep track of, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I feel like if you're picking up a book like this, that might not be the energy that you want to be putting into it. So to me, that was not the greatest. I feel like it had potential. It just fell a little short for me of the experience that I was hoping to have. And yet, unlike the other thrillers and mysteries on my list here of ones that I've read so far, the craziness of this book I could fully get behind and endorse, because it's like written right there. You are fatally invited. You kind of know going into it that it's going to be a little bit off the wall. So some of the unreal aspects I could deal with. And there were some good twists, and I enjoyed some of the characters, but I think it was hard to fully develop all of the characters because there were so many. And it was very Clue, Knives Out, Agatha Christie style. Yeah, it is just begging to be a Netflix series. And I think as a Netflix series, it would be really fun. It's basically almost written as a screenplay, says I, a person who's never written a screenplay. Oh no, I want my stack here. The last one of the books that I read is a book that I don't have the physical copy of anymore because I gave it to my niece, which her mom doesn't know about, and maybe I shouldn't have done that. And that was Bunny by Mona Awad. I think I have some notes on it. God, I hope so, because that book was wild. Okay, Bunny by Mona Awad. I'm still thinking about this book. I don't know how I feel about it, except when I was reading it, I was like strangely intrigued, but I also felt like I don't know what I'm reading, and maybe I'm not even smart enough to fully understand what this author is trying to do. I liked this book, but it's crazy, and it's very much like a fever dream in some ways. I don't know what was real and what wasn't real. The reason I liked it and that I was pulled into it is that it was very like Heathersy to me, if anybody knows that movie from I believe the 80s, with Winona Ryder. It was one of maybe the first movies that she did. Shannon Doherty is also in that movie, but I loved that movie in high school. It was like a big movie for my friends and I. So it was like, oh, I wrote here, very Heathers, but on LSD. So there you go. Basically, the story revolves around this group of girls. They call themselves, well, they call each other Bunny. So the character that you're with the most, her name is Samantha, refers to them as the Bunnies. And she becomes involved with that group and in their world, which is very twisted and kind of macabre in a way. I don't really want to say more than that because part of the experience of reading this book is not knowing anything about it. So I will just leave it at that and say, if you like experimental storytelling, then you probably will like this book. Also, if you like a certain like artistry to your storytelling, which not everybody does, so and I don't always like it, but I was in the mood to read a book like this, knowing a little bit about it going into it, although I didn't really know the story. But I had a sense that this wasn't going to just be like a very straightforward type of book. And so I was prepared for that, and I went into it, and I think under some other circumstances it might have been one that I DNF'd, but it has such strong support from people. It's very polarizing. But if you like to think outside of the box, or you like to think of yourself as somebody who thinks outside of the box, that might be more accurate, at least for me, then it's definitely at least worth a shot. And even if you don't make it through the first time, I would keep trying again. But yeah, if you liked Heathers and you like the idea of like fever dream, almost stream of conscious, but it's not, it's definitely not that, but there is just that sort of unreal aspect to it. And you have to decide or discern what your grasp on the reality of this book is, then definitely shoot for it. Okay, I have 5% left. So I'm gonna end this video just really quickly talking about this last one that I'm reading right now called All Fours by Miranda July. It's very popular right now. It's quite critically acclaimed, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm on page 117, chapter 10, so I'm not quite halfway through, but I am definitely enjoying it. I love that it's told from the perspective of a 45-year-old woman. I think this is becoming more common. At least I hope that it is, and I'm really, really glad that there's going to be more like representation for people who are closer to my age. No offense to the 20 and 30-year-olds, but I'm sorry I don't relate to you anymore. I want to see some more content and creation from women who are in their 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s. Like, I want to see what your wisdom, pass it down. I want to know it all. Well, I don't want to know it all. I want to experience it for myself, but I really want to read stories like this, and I'm super excited. I was reading something else, and I was kind of, I don't remember what was happening, but I like somehow this got pushed off, and I was like, no, I want to read this so badly. So anyway, I'm very excited that I'm reading it now, and I hope to be finished with it by the end of next week if life doesn't get in the way, as it seems to be doing quite frequently lately. Okay, I have 3% left on my camera battery. Thank you for watching. I think I'm going to focus on book stuff right now. I should stop committing myself to doing anything, but I think it just, I have some thoughts on other things, which is making me not want to like make other type of content right now. I just kind of want to stick to books, but I think one thing that is very true and is probably becoming apparent is that I change my mind a lot. So anyway, thank you again. I don't know. Yeah, I cannot open or end a video to save my life. That's the end of the video. Goodbye. See you next time. I don't know. Get out of here.